Thanks so much for the intro, and hi and welcome everybody. I'm glad to see so many people here. Really glad that this event was able to happen. I know it's been a pretty crazy couple of weeks, probably more crazy than any of us may be able to remember. Right now, it's super important to take care of ourselves, take care of our families and our communities. But it's also super important to still be able to connect with people while we're social distancing. And I think it's awesome that we can do that and still learn at the same time. So thanks again for still putting it on. And again, thanks for everybody for being here. So we'll jump in. Where the heck to get started? I am a big fan of dogs and all things furry, really. So you'll see some of those pop up throughout this presentation. Hopefully you will enjoy it. More about me and how I got my start in R. I have a strong liberal arts background. I have an undergrad degree in political science. I did a number of grad courses in political science and in public administration. I took a whole lot of years of French and Spanish language and really never saw myself necessarily going into a math or science type of degree or role. But I floated around a lot after all of that liberal arts stuff, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I did work in animal welfare for a time. I worked in advertising for healthcare. I worked in real estate. I've worked in education, done a lot of stuff before I finally settled on, hey, let's do this data science thing. Not really by the seat of my pants, but it wasn't necessarily the best well-researched decision ever. Super happy about it in the long run, but just kind of went at it on a whim, and it worked out for me, thankfully. So now I am a data analyst. I'm also still a graduate TA for Northwestern. And as mentioned, I also really like furry things. So this is a picture of my two dogs. My husband and I got married. The dogs got their own wedding cake. And as you can see, Jackson is not particularly interested in sharing. But they are super cute and they may or may not bark at some point during this presentation. So if you hear them, it's just their way of saying hi. When I started 2020, I think I tried to, at least at the start of every year, sort of think about what my goals are going to be for the year, what I want to do. And one of the things that I wanted to put on my goal list for the year that I thought was maybe a little bit ambitious, but wanted to try anyway, was to give a talk at a conference like this. And I thought, I'm maybe not the best person in R, like I haven't been doing it that long. I give a talk, like I could do that. So I put it on my list, and then I saw this call for talks for satRdays DC, and I thought I could do that, and I could give a little intro talk. So I submitted a proposal, and earlier this month, I got an email that said, "Great, we love your proposal. We'd love you to give a talk." And I thought, "Holy crap, what am I going to do?" And I was in New York at the time, and so I sent my boss, actually technically not my boss anymore, but a mentor, we'll call her a mentor, a message in Slack, and I was like, so I put this proposal in to do this talk at satRdays DC, and they accepted it, and I have no idea what I'm going to do. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be great. What was your proposal?" She was asking all these questions, trying to put me up, and she was like, "Well, how much time do you have?" And I said 15 minutes, and she was like, "Oh, that's great, perfect." And then it dawned on me, I had this major imposter syndrome moment, and I thought, but that's the maximum, and I don't have to take up 15 minutes. So the next slide is what I sent her as my proposal. I was like, maybe I could just do this instead. I could just make it real quick and say, "Hey, glad you're here. Art's great. See you later." I did put a little bit more together than that today, but that's to say that imposter syndrome is totally a real thing. So I want to acknowledge that. I have suffered from it quite a bit in my art career. And in general is bound to feel that, and just know that it's okay, and we all do. And the challenge is to accept that you totally know what you're doing, at least enough to try, and to move forward. So heads up, don't recommend this route necessarily, but this is how I got there. So I mentioned before, I did do a data science master's degree with Northwestern. I finished that in 2018. I started it in 2017. And I went into that with absolutely no programming experience whatsoever. I thought, I can figure this out. I'm a relatively smart person. I can probably do it. The academic department at Northwestern said, there's no requirement that you have any programming experience or programming knowledge to come into the program. However, we would really recommend that you do some basic stuff, that you have a solid foundation in Python and R before you come in. And I thought, meh, I'll figure it out. So I started the program. The first two courses in the curriculum were Python courses. They were intro level, like math courses, but done in Python, and very quickly realized that that strong recommendation to have a base in the programming language was a really good one, and that I should have listened to it, but I didn't. And it was tough. The first several weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of that grad program, I nearly lost my mind. I thought, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I'm never, ever going to like wrap my head around this. I'm not going to be good at it. This really stinks. And almost quit. I didn't, though. I did manage to pull myself together to go through it. Again, it was hard. I had to really accept that, you know, I might not get the answer to everything. Like when I submitted my final for that first programming class, I left the first question blank, which I was reminded this weekend when I was looking back at it. And that's okay, right? Like it's okay to not know everything. It's a learning process, and it's all learning process. If you leave today with nothing else, hopefully you remember that you will never necessarily be like an expert. You'll never know anything, or sorry, you'll never know everything. You can totally know things, just not all the things. You'll never know everything in art, and that's okay. It's a learning process forever, and it's really about learning how to learn. The story about how I got to R, though, is after that first quarter, I got through it. I was super worried because the next quarter, the classes were going to introduce you to the R programming language. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I just struggled through Python. R is going to be awful. Turns out R was not as awful of an experience, in part because R is clearly better. But side note, because I'd gotten through that part of like learning how to learn what I was doing, got through the R courses, was able to choose which programming language I wanted to move forward with, chose R, and that's the end of the story. So bumpy road, again, would not necessarily recommend going that route when you're learning R or any programming language, but that's how I got there. This is a quick little at one of the first things that I ever did in R. I went back to my final for one of my first art classes and pulled this out this weekend. So this is one of my first things. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's, you know, standard bar chart, not terrible. So how did I get better in R? I am better, I think, than I was when I first started. I did a whole lot of work for grad school in R, of course. I went on to, through that process, Google pretty much everything. And that's what you'll find in R and in lots of things is you will Google a lot, and that's okay. And the phrase and the concept, you know, copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, that was me. I did that a lot, but that's also how you learn. I did finish the master's degree. I felt pretty good coming out of it. I thought this was tough. I rallied. I figured it out. Here I am. I'm ready to go, you know, take on the world. I was able to move into the data science department at my company and very quickly felt less good about my R skills, realizing one, that there were so many more smarter people than me in this department, which was awesome for me and still is as a learning experience, but also really highlighted just how much more there is to know about R and what you can do with it. I have worked daily in R for the last year plus in my job, as well as just occasionally, like for things like this. And I have great support from my data science peers at work who are, again, much better at R than I am. The result of all this, though, is that I still, most of the time, feel like I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I think I sometimes fake it pretty well, right? But it's still a lot. So this is one of my latest cool R things as a transition from the bar chart to the Houston metro area by zip code that is coded by median income from the census. However, the super cool thing about this that took me several days to get working is this like hover ability where you can hover over these dots and it tells you the name of the place. I know I can't hear anybody or see any faces, but I'm just imagining you all oohing and ahhing right now because I was super proud of this when I finally got it to work. So my best advice for getting started is just go for it. The best way to learn with this is to just get started. I was very overwhelmed on at the beginning. And I think it can be a very overwhelming experience, but the thing to do is really to just go for it. So the first thing that you're going to need, of course, is R. R is an open source programming language. It is free to download. I will put like access to the slides somewhere at some point. I'm sure you can Google and find R, but there are a number of links throughout the presentation, so that'll be accessible eventually. So you'll need the language. The screenshot here is of RStudio. Highly recommend it. Not written like necessary to work in R, but super, super, super helpful from my experience. It's an integrated development environment, which just means it makes it easier, really, to work in the language. You'll also, of course, need some data. There's lots of ways to get your hands on data. You can use work data, you can use open source data from the web for something that you're super interested or super passionate about. Just dig around, find something that you're interested in. And then I also really recommend setting some very specific learning goals for yourself with that data. So if the first thing that you want to do is figure out how to like make and sort a table, like the equivalent of a pivot table in Excel, great, go for it. If you want to do data visualization and pick a specific type of viz, great, pick that. Just pick something very specific and very actionable, because otherwise you'll quickly figure out that there is so much that you could do that you may get lost if you don't have a very specific thing that you're going after. So a warning though about data. There are two data sets built into R called IRIS and MT-CARS. They are a little bit nicer to work with than real world data. IRIS and MT-CARS are not super large, but they're also very nicely great if you're just getting started and you want to kind of toy around and see what's there and see what the capabilities are. Real world data, though, is not that nice to work with. It's messy, it's large, it's sometimes not formatted well, actually kind of never formatted well, really. You may find yourself dealing with dates that aren't formatted as dates, or columns that are missing half their values, or any number of other issues that you will run into with real world data. So just a caution, IRIS and MT-CARS are great, again, for just sort of figuring out how R works, but I would suggest you get into some real world data as soon as you can, but also maybe don't go quite for like this crazy guy, like go for the in between the lab and the werewolf, somewhere in the middle to start. Terms that you should know. So CRAN, otherwise known as the Comprehensive R Archive Network, fun fact, did not know what that stood for until I was putting together this presentation. So there you go. That's what houses almost everything R. That's where you will download the actual language from. It's also where like 5,000 plus packages are housed. So you will spend a lot of time on CRAN if you go around in R. Environment, one of the great things about RStudio is that it displays your environment for you. But that's what holds all your objects and your functions and anything else that you're working on. And it also helps the programming language know how to relate things to each other. Working directory is just where R is looking for things as you're working in it. So it's essentially like a file folder that you're pointing back to. Important to set your working directory so that when you're saving or trying to look for files, R knows where to go. Project is, you can think of it as sort of like a file folder as well. It's just a container, really, for all of the things that you're working on in a particular project. So I have tons of projects in ours, but when you're first starting out, it's a good way to keep like maybe a work project separate from the thing that you're just toying with or learning, that you can have multiple like RStudio windows open at a time. And if you have your pack or your projects set appropriately, then they won't confuse each other, they'll talk appropriately. And then the last half are things that happen in R that you want to know sort of the difference between, or that will be really useful. Install packages is a way to install a package. So what is a package? Base R is the base programming language. A package is something that does stuff that it's cooler, really, than base R, right? And there's, I think, 5,200 packages right now on CRAN. So there's something for pretty much everything. And most of the time there's more than one thing that does roughly the same thing. So in a moment, I'll kind of go through some suggested packages, things that I've worked with before that I think are super useful and good to know starting out. But you'll inevitably want to work with packages, and installed app packages is how you get the package into and to be able to work with it, to download it. Library is how you call the package. So two different things. You have to first install the package, and then when you want to work with it, you'll need to call it with library. The question mark is super useful. You can type the question mark and then the name of the thing that you have a question about, and RStudio will give you some info and say, here's what you might want to know. Browse vignettes is also really great to know about. That is essentially gives you a kind of long form example paper type of thing for certain packages. So if you're trying to figure out how to use a certain package, what this particular variable is asking for, what are your different options when you're setting, etc. Browse vignettes is a way for you to see in more detail than you can see on the front page of Gran how to use it. And then comment is my like top tip of, I think, what to use when you're getting started. It's a way to put lines of text in your file without trying to run that text. So it's a way of saying like, here's what I did with this line of code or what I was trying to do. So you can remember what specific pieces of code we're doing when you come back and look at it later. So useful packages. I think all of these are great, 10 of 10 for sure. dplyr is a data manipulation package. And these are all part of the tidy as well. TidyR is a data form package, so it's a way of helping information and tables relate to each other and reshape that data as necessary. ggplot2 is a fantastic data visualization. Lubridate makes it a lot easier to work with dates and times inside your data. Our Markdown is a way of putting your code and your output of your code together, sort of like in almost like you can put your code and your output along with just base text. Our Markdown is what I used actually to make this presentation and IO slides. You can do PDF, HTML, other types of outputs, and then Shiny is another type of output that can make interactive versions of what you're doing. Also, some resources as you're getting started. And again, I'll make sure that these links are available so that you can actually click on them later. There are a number of reference cards out there, as well as cheat sheets. The reference card that's linked here is reminding you of just what are the basic operators in R, how to load data, how to save data, all that good stuff. R for Data Science and R Graphics Cookbook are both long texts that are free to access, which is fantastic, but they have lots of great examples and lots of, like additional meat behind them besides just a cheat sheet. Great references. R Markdown, the definitive guide, definitive one, for using R Markdown, right? That process of getting your code and the output of your code into a more digestible format. The base R cheat sheet is, I think it's a 2-pager, kind of front and back, again, with just quick reminders of how to use base R. And back one slide, all of these also have cheat sheets available that you can download and have quick and easy reference to remind you of how to use specific functionality of those packages. So, parting thoughts is winding down goals so you don't get overwhelmed. It's really easy to fall, I think, face first down the, oh my gosh, there's so much out there and I have no idea what I'm doing, is exactly what happens. If you start small though, then you'll build your confidence while also not completely get lost in all the options. Remember that there's a whole lot of ways to do the exact same thing in R. It's great if you can get the shortest possible way, the cleanest possible way, but when you're first starting out, realize that because there's so many different ways, just getting it done is good enough to start. So don't get totally bogged down in what's the best, cleanest, perfect way, because you'll also find a lot of different opinions on those things. Remember to use comments liberally to remind yourself when you go back and look at your code, especially when you're first getting started, what the heck was this thing doing? And remember that even the experts, the people who have been doing this for a long time, Google all the time. We are always going back to remind ourselves how to do something or to learn something new. So who are not great dog fans, these are 3 of our foster kittens at the moment. So you definitely need a quarantine friend or 2, maybe. And then finally, to wrap up, since we're right at time, if you want to get in touch with me or with Kittens, this is social links. So right on time, I'll go ahead and hand it back.